What's up, guys? Mickey Gaminol here. Today I am going over percents to fractions to decimals. So percents to fractions, something like 3/4 to decimals, which is like 0.37. All right, so percents, fractions, and decimals, you can think of them as pretty much the same thing, right? You can think of them almost as like different languages, okay? Every language, you need to be able to say the word yes, right? So we have yes in English, we have sí in Spanish, and we have like oo in Tagalog, right? All three of these things mean yes, but they mean the exact same yes. They're just said differently. And so that's the same thing with percents, decimals, and fractions. And so if we started with something like 1/2, which is usually the best way to start, because everybody has split something with somebody else. Everybody knows how to take half of things. A lot of times this is something that we use all the time. And so most people know that 1/2 is 50%. Okay, that's 1 out of 2. So if there's 100 things, you get 50 of them. If you're getting half of them, you get 50%. And the decimal for that is 0.5. The easiest way to think of percents is to think per cent. And so cents comes from the word like century, centipede. It means 100. Per means divide. So percent means out of 100. All right. So if we're thinking of something like 36%, if we wanted to convert that to a decimal, that would be 36 cents, kind of like that, right? So you can convert percents to decimals very, very simply using that. Think of it as pennies type of mentality. So if we did 75%, that's going to be 75 cents. But what happens when we do 215%? Well, now we have two wholes, which is 100% of something. So that's going to be 2.15. That's how you convert percents to decimals. All right. Converting percents to decimals and decimals to percents, pretty straightforward, pretty easy stuff. If I have 6, we would think of that as $6, right? 6 wholes. So that would be 600%. Okay. So we can go from decimals to percents to decimals fairly easily. Where people get in trouble is when they see fractions. So something like 3/4, 1/2, or 1/4. These ones are a little bit easier to break down. So 1/2, as we said, is equal to 50%, which is equal to 0.5. But the way that you actually solve from a fraction to a percent is you use what this line is. You may recognize this line from this symbol. It means to divide. And so 1 out of 2, we would then say is 1 out of 2, or 1 divided by 2. The idea here is how many 2's will fit into a 1. And obviously 2 is too big, so it doesn't fit perfectly. And that's why we have that fraction. So if we do top dog gets the house, I always say that with my students, top dog is the 1. So that's going to go inside the house. The denominator is that 2. So that's going to go outside the house. So how many times does 2 fit into 1? We know that it doesn't fit perfectly. So what if we change it to a 1.0, right? Just like $1 is $1.00, we can change 1 to 1.0. How many times does 2 now go into 10? And we say, oh, okay, that's easy, 5. 2 times 5 is 10, subtract, and it terminates. And so we get that 0.5, which again is what that decimal that we wanted. All right, that's going to be how you convert all fractions into decimals. Okay, you just do the actual division. If we do it again, we'll try it with 3/4 and then 1/4. So 4 is the bottom dog, 3 is the top dog. We call it 3.0. And then whenever you're dividing with decimals, just throw the decimal right on top, just like that. How many times does 4 go into 30? It doesn't fit perfectly, but it does fit 7 times. It's 28 with a remainder of 2. And now we add another 0 because 3.00 is the same as $3. So how many times now will 4 go into 20? And it fits exactly 5. 5 times 4 is 20, and that decimal terminates. And so we get 0.75. And if we wanted to turn that into a percentage, again, we're very good at that now. We know that that's 75%. 75 cents, 75%. Same idea. So if you take a quiz and you get 3 of them right out of the 4, that means you got a 75% on that quiz. You got 0.75 out of all of the questions, 0.75 of the questions right. 1/4 is going to be the other side of that. So if we did 3/4 and 1/4, that should give us 1 whole if we combine those two. If I have 3 pieces of Kit Kat here and 1 piece of Kit Kat here, that's going to give me a full candy bar. So 3/4 plus 1/4, therefore I should have 75% plus 25%. Let's find out if that's true. Top dog gets the house, so the 1's inside, the 4's outside. How many times does 4 go into 1? It won't. How many times does 4 go into 10? It will. Goes in 2 times. We subtract and get 2. Bring down another 0. How many times does 4 go into 20? That's 5. 4 times 5 is 20. And we get that 25%. What do you know? Exactly what we wanted to see. So percents, decimals, and fractions are all very, very closely related. They're just different ways of saying the same thing. A fraction is a number between 0 and 1. So 3/4, if we have 0 over here and 1 over here, 1/2 is going to be right here. 3/4 is going to be right there. 1/4 is going to be right there. And you're good at this if you've ever done any measurements or anything like that. You know, like 1/4 inches, 3/4 of a foot, all that kind of thing. You can start kind of seeing how all of these ideas are very, very closely related. So all a fraction is a piece of a whole. And same with decimals. Decimals are used to be pieces of that whole as well as our percents. If you get a percentage of something, that means you get a piece of that whole. So specifically like real estate agents, they get a percentage on every sale. So I think it's usually 3%. If you're selling a house for $100,000, they get $1 for every $100. So if you sold that house for $100 or $100,000 and they got 3%, that means they get $3,000, right? 3,000 is the 3% out of that full 100,000. So everything is always going to come back to math. It's always going to come back to being pieces of the whole. All right. So if we look a little bit at the worksheet for this section, we can see somewhere in here. Decimals, percents, and fractions. So we can see here very clearly, okay, write each as a decimal. We went over that. This is one of the easier ones. So I'll help you guys with that. Write each as a percent. Again, that's going to be very similar, but in reverse. This is where it gets crafty. Write each as a fraction. And so we're going to remember that rule that percents is out of 100. And then write each as a percent using decimals when necessary. Cool. And then there's all your answers, of course. So let's give a couple of these a try. I'm not going to do everything because I want you to get some time to do it yourself. But we will spend a couple minutes just burning through these. Maybe 2 per section. I think that sounds fair. 2 per section. So section 1, write each as a decimal. Remember, just convert it from percent to cents. So if we do this one, 90%, that's going to be 0.9. All right. We would write it possibly as 0.90, but the 0 doesn't really compute to anything, right? It's not adding or raising or lowering that 9/10. So that's why we just call it 0.9. 115.9%. Again, we're just going to shift the decimal 2 times and we get 1.159, just like that. Okay, so changing it from percent to decimal, really you just shift the decimal twice, but you can always think of pennies to kind of help you keep it simple. So these are the answers for 1 and 3. Next one, write each as a percent. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're shifting it to the right. How many cents is it, right? So 0.452 is going to be 45.2%, right? You can tell like right away, if I did 0.5, that's halfway to 1. So that would be 50%. And so you can always come back to kind of the simple numbers to help you do more complicated work. So like this one, 0.002, this one's going to be 0.2%, 0.002. And so you would think, okay, well, 1 cent would be right here, but I don't even have 1 cent. So I have 0.2%. That's how you would solve this one. Number 12, 5%. And so these become really, really simple as soon as you're getting through it. 14 maybe seems a little more complicated, but it's just 10%. That's all it is, right? It's like $3.1. That's going to be $3.10. Therefore, you get that 10%. Okay. Next one. Write each one as a fraction. Now this, a lot of background knowledge is going to help you a ton. But if we were to just write this as a fraction, you're just going to write each one out of 100. 70 out of 100, 58 out of 100. But if you really want to be good with your fractions, what you got to do is you have to be able to reverse this. So we talked about 25% earlier. You'll see it right here. 25% is 1/4. And so if we wanted to make that fraction, we would write this as 1 out of 4. But the way you get there is through what's called reducing. So you got to find a factor that will fit into both top and bottom. In this case, the number is 25. How many 25s will go into 25? 1 will. And how many 25s will go into 100? 4 will. And so you get 1 out of 4. The way that you can imagine this is if I split a Kit Kat up into 100 equal pieces and I give you one of those, you would have 25 of those pieces. You'd have 25 out of the 100, but you'd only have 1 out of 4. And so 25 out of 100 is the same as 1 out of 4. And so this is how you start reducing. Same thing with 70 out of 100. The greatest common factor here is going to be 10. What's a number that fits into any number that ends in a 0 is going to be 10. And so 10 goes into 70 7 times, 10 goes into 100 10 times, and we get 7/10. That's what 70% is. 58 seems like it can't be reduced, but it can. There's a 2 that'll fit into both top and bottom. So we can cut both of those numbers in half. Half of 100 is 50, and half of 58 is going to be, what is that, 29? And so 29 out of 50 can't be reduced any further, but this is going to be how you reduce those fractions. Of course, always, if you really don't know, just go 71 out of 100. Put the top one over 100, and then hopefully you can reduce if you need to. This one's really special, 66.6 repeated out of 100. This is actually 2/3. And so what you really want to do is get good at some base level fractions. And I'll cover that at the end of this to kind of help you memorize these things. Like 50%, you know that's 1/2. But the way you do it is you say 50 out of 100 and then reduce it, divide both top and bottom by 50, you'll get 1 out of 2. Okay, and you can reduce in any number of ways as long as you're doing the same thing to the top as you are to the bottom. And we'll come back to some basic fractions here in a second. Now we're writing each one as a percent. Remember, 1/2 was easy, that was 50%. But if we do something like 3/8, all you have to do is just go ahead and divide. How many times will 8 go into 3? It won't. So how many times will 8 go into 30? 3 times. Bring down another 0. How many times does 8 go into 60? 8 times, what would that be? 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 7 is 56. So we'll go with 56. Subtract, we get 4. Bring down one last 0. How many times does 8 go into 40? 5 times. 0.375. And if we wanted to write this as a percent, which we do, we're going to call that 37.5%. Okay, so all you got to do is divide, and then if you get a decimal, you want to convert that to a percent. So one of the key things about any test is knowing exactly what the question's asking you. Here it's asking not for a decimal, but a percent. So if we go through and answer this way, but the answer is this, we'll still get it wrong, even though we're technically right, because we didn't write it as a percent. All right, and that's it. So real quick before we separate, I just wanted to explain some basic fractions. So 1/4, well, we'll say 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. If you can learn these 4 fractions, you're in pretty good shape because then all you got to do is multiply. So if I wanted to say 3/5, 3/5 is 3 1/5. So I just figure out what each one of these is, and then depending on the numerator, I can just multiply to solve for it. For example, 1/2 is 50%. Therefore, 2 out of 2, well, that's 100% because that's double 50. 1/3, that's going to be 33.3%, and that's repeated. And the way we prove this is we say 3 goes into 1 how many times? It won't. 3 goes into 10 how many times? 3 times. Subtract, we get 9, bring down the 1. And then this goes on forever. How many times does 3 go into 10? 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, bring down the 1. Go, bring down another 0. How many times does 3 go into 10? And we can do this all day long, right? It's going to last forever. It's what's called a repeating decimal. And so 0.33333, 33% is 1/3. So that's what you take away from that. And then if we wanted 2/3, well, it's going to be double that. So double 33, 66.6%. And then 3/3 is, of course, 3 out of 3, which is 100%. But if we follow this pattern, it's going to be 99.99999, which is infinitely close to 100. So we're just going to call it 100%. Okay, little trick with 1/3. 1/4, commonly referred to as quarters, because that is 25%. Therefore, 2/4, which is half, right? 2 is half of 4. That's 50%, 2 quarters. And then 3/4, you already guessed it, 75%. Finally, 1/5, 20%, 2/5, 40%. And notice there's a pattern here, 3/5. Well, now we're over a half, right? 3 is over half of 5. And so that's 60%. 4/5 and 5/5. 4/5, 20, 40, 60, 80. And 5/5 is 100%. And so you can start thinking in these terms. And then lastly, just 1/10, that's going to be half of a fifth. So that's going to be 10%. And so it gets pretty cool once you have a little more familiarity with it. Covering all of it at once is pretty difficult. So what it really takes to understand this, probably watch the video a couple times, but in between videos is working on your math. So finding percent questions, finding decimal questions, and seeing how it's always related, right? The way that you do percents doesn't change. The way that, like, the questions they ask change, the numbers will change, but the truth of the math is always going to stay the same. And so what's cool about this little example, 1/10 being 10%, is if we go through and say 2/10, that's 20%, right? But what we notice is, wait a minute, that's the same as 1/5. And the reason for that is because 2/10 is 1/5. If we wanted to reduce 2/10, we would divide top and bottom by 2/2, and we would get 1 out of 5. And so 1/5 is exactly equal to 2/10. Both of them are 20%, and both of them are 0.2. So yes, C, O, NAM, right? All the different ways to say yes. It's the same idea, 20%, 0.2, 1/5, they all mean the same exact thing. So yeah, hopefully you get some time to spend with decimals, percents, and fractions. If you have any questions, let me know.